If we could highlight one thing that Brian Kelly and the rest of this LSU football coaching staff has really highlighted during spring practice, it's the process. Emphasizing not necessarily being where they need to be today, where they would like to be on game one against Florida State, but emphasizing that as long as they're making progress, that's a good sign. As long as they have a plan for this process, then they're okay with it. So exactly how is that process going? And especially on the defensive side of things, because Matt House, spoke with the media today. So we'll break down what he had to say about exactly how the defense is going through that process, plus other spring practice updates, injury updates, who was out, who was in, plus LSU baseball with a tough 5-4 loss last night against Arkansas. What exactly went wrong there? We'll break all of that down and more on today's edition of Locked on LSU.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked on LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. So if you like to listen to podcasts while you're on the go, whether that's on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever your preferred podcast platform may be, feel free to do that. But, if you're just hanging out, if you want to throw something on your television, if you want something to watch, we're also on YouTube as well. So make sure to subscribe to our YouTube page, Locked on LSU. And as soon as the podcasts drop, you'll get notified. Also, make sure to follow along on Twitter. You can follow along the podcast Twitter at Locked on LSU, where I'll tweet out links to the YouTube link and also links to wherever you want to listen, whatever your preferred podcast platform is, wherever Locked on LSU is available. Also, you can follow along on my Twitter at Caroline Fenton 1. And I am Caroline Fenton, and I am your host, as I am every single day. I am an LSU graduated from LSU in 2019 from the Manship School of Mass Communication. And I am a diehard LSU fan, all things LSU, and I currently am a sports talk radio host in Nashville, Tennessee at ESPN 1025 The Game, where I cover all things NFL, NHL, college football, and just whatever else is going on in sports in general. But first and foremost, like I mentioned, the process is what we've heard so much from Brian Kelly and the rest of this LSU coaching staff. So what exactly does that mean? What does that entail? And I don't even know if this coaching staff knew exactly what the process would be, exactly the map of what that would look like, because they didn't even really know what they had. They had such a varying level of talent and experience and positional groups, and they were kind of just paper clipping and gluing things together as they could. But this process, what does it look like, at least defensively? Because when Matt House spoke to the media today after practice, that's what he talked so much about, was the process, and emphasizing the fact that they are not where they want to be right now, but they don't necessarily have to be where they want to be right now, considering all of the changes, considering all of the new players coming in through the transfer portal, and considering that they have varying levels of experience on both sides of the ball, but especially on defense, with so much of the secondary made up of players through the transfer portal, the defensive line made up of players, albeit there are plenty returners from LSU, plenty recruits coming in, but also from the transfer portal. So you've got guys that have had 3 or 4 years of college experience behind them and guys who are coming into college now. So there's a lot to deal with. There are a lot of variables to deal with on both sides of the ball, but especially on defense. But this is what defensive coordinator Matt House had to say about what that process is looking like.
Going good. We're getting a little better every day. Got a long ways to go. Glad that we don't play next weekend, but wish we had another 15 practices just because it's been fun to work with the guys and they are improving. I think any time that you go through, like, this is a process, right? And the building part of a process is fun. And right now we're at the ground level of that process, and we're just trying to establish everyday habits that grow into traits. And we're working through that every day.
And that's something that, Matt House coming in from the NFL may not have as much experience having to do is really starting from the ground up. Now, you may hear what Matt House has to say and say, okay, we're in the very early beginning stages of that process, of that building process. So, what is there to come from there? Why isn't this team, especially a team that historically is such a strong defensive team, it may be a little bit disheartening to hear that they're in the very, early foundational steps of this process. But what exactly are they doing in order to get to the next step, in order to, develop that foundation, but also build upon it? And throughout spring practice, Matt House and the rest of the defense have done this drill called chase and rally. So on the practice field at the very, very beginning of practice, it starts with 4 linemen, 3 linebackers, 4 members of the secondary, and they're all facing these ghost offensive players, these invisible, imaginary offensive players on the other side. And Matt House is sitting in the middle with a ball, and he has a fake snap count, and he's either going to the right or to the left. And the defenders have to follow him and have to follow that ball, and they have to finish that play all the way up from linemen all the way back to the secondary. And there's assistant coaches on the sidelines yelling at them to finish that play, to finish that job at hand. So that's what they've been doing to start practice. And exactly what's the point of the chase and rally, and what does Matt House seem to be getting out of it? Here's what he had to say about beginning practices on that kind of level of intensity.
Every part of practice is critical, obviously, but we try to set the tempo with 2 things that are really, really important: the ability to run and the ability to tackle. So that's the whole point of starting practice, with those 2 things. Just pursuing the football and then finishing on the football.
I mean, it seems very simple. Defensively, the 2 absolutely positively things that you absolutely need to do is run and tackle. So what are they doing to build upon this foundation? What are they doing to continue their way through the process? So even though they're not where they want to be, game 1 against Florida State, how do they get there? And it's starting with the fundamentals. Because if you can't run and you can't tackle, then what can you do? How are you going to be able to put pressure on the quarterback? How are you going to be able to force turnovers? How are you going to be able to stop the run if you can't run or tackle? So that's exactly what they're doing in order to build upon this process that they've established within the defense, is starting on a very high tempo, high intensity drill that focuses in on the most important things, on the core of that defense. And in my opinion, I really have to give Matt House credit for that, because he is coming in from the highest level of the league in the NFL. And it may seem a little elementary for him to take it back to things like that, to, making the fundamentals seem like they are in a fun, up-tempo way, and being able to set the tone for practice in such a high energy environment, but also focusing in on running and tackling and the most important core things of the defense. And I do have to give him credit for being able to recognize that this defense and their players aren't necessarily at a level that they need to be. Matt House coming in from the highest level of football, recognizing that this defense just isn't quite there yet. And it's for a varying number of reasons. It's so many players coming in with varying levels of experience, whether that be transfer portal, whether that be recruits coming in for that first year, recognizing kind of the holes that this defense has, and being able to focus in on those, and starting on a very elementary level, in a very high tempo, high energy way. So this LSU football team is going through the process, and they're taking it slow. They're taking it step by step, but it's an incredibly calculated and measured way of approaching this football team. And per Matt House, not where they want to be, but it's been going well, and it's been going good. They've been having fun, and at the end of the day, they're making progress, and that is of utmost importance. But coming up next, a few practice updates, some injury updates, who is in, who is out. We'll get into that coming up next, but before we do that, I want to tell you about Built Bar. So this is the time of year that, it's really not fun to think about all of the New Year's resolutions that you set, because you may have set them in January and you say, I want to be in good shape, I want to be fit by summertime. Well, summertime's coming up, and it's really easy to get back on track with all of those resolutions with Built Bar, because if your resolution was to eat right or to get fit, it's so easy to do that with Built Bar, because I actually really enjoy eating them. The puffs are absolutely delicious. If you haven't tried them, they're one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. They're the first protein-infused marshmallow. So if if you're one of those people who loves chocolate, who loves snacking on candy and sweet treats like that, then this is for you because they're fluffy, they're marshmallowy, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. All Built Bars, in fact, are covered in 100% real chocolate, but they're low calorie and they're high protein and they taste like a candy bar, but they don't have the nutritional value like a candy bar has with 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, dozens of net carbs, because at Built Bar, they taste like a candy bar, but they only have 130 calories, 4 grams net sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. For me, I'm constantly on the go. My schedule's up in the air every single day. It's really hard to kind of establish an eating schedule and to be able to cook and sit down and eat a well-balanced meal. But with Built Bar, it's so easy to just throw it in my purse and my pocket when I'm on the go. And with 17 grams of protein, it keeps me full all day long. Plus, they have delicious flavors like mint brownie, coconut almond, white chocolate cookies and cream. They've got bananas foster. They've got delicious flavors coming out all the time. And at Built Bar, they're all about the taste. They make it taste delicious first, and then they pack in all the good stuff, and they do it every single time. So go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Thanks for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. Now, a very big announcement coming from our friends here at Locked On. So starting Thursday, April 28th, tune into Locked On NFL Draft's live coverage of the 2022 NFL Draft. It is coming up so soon. They've got 3 days of real-time analysis from our extensive lineup of experts and insiders. So you can watch Locked On NFL Draft live on the Locked On NFL Draft YouTube page. That'll be on April 28th at 7 p.m. Eastern. The next day, April 29th at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, and April 30th at 11:30 a.m. Eastern. But if you are dying to know who your team is going to take and you just cannot wait until draft night, then you can catch Odyssey and Locked On's NFL Mock Draft Special hosted by Brian Peacock and former scout Matt Williamson of the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show all week leading up to the first pick. So you can find the Odyssey NFL Mock Draft Show on our Odyssey and Locked On NFL Draft podcast feeds and the Odyssey NFL Mock Draft from April 18th through the 22nd and April 25th. So, like I said, some practice updates. Because Brian Kelly has emphasized how there are different chapters of spring practice. And the very first chapter is just, setting that foundation, learning everything that they need to know, players and coaches-wise also learning what their players need to do. Who are their players? What do they need? What is the best scheme that fits them best? So we're now entering into the second phase of spring practice, and who is going to be able to fit into those spring practices? Who has been at spring practices these past couple of weeks? So one, first and foremost, that we saw yesterday, if you may have seen, Michael Cobble of WBRZ put out a photo on Twitter of John Emery leaving practice limping. At the very, very beginning of practice, he had his arms around two trainers who were helping him off the practice field. So that was a cause of concern for me, having a veteran player like that in John Emery, who has really become such an integral part of this offense, limping off the field. But he posted on Instagram last night. He said, "I'm going to be good. It was just a twisted ankle." So we'll continue to monitor that, hoping that he's all good. And we'll also monitor that for the spring game coming up next Saturday on April 23rd to see if he'll be good to go for that. But we'll monitor John Emery's ankle as well, who was seen left limping off the field yesterday. Now, had a few returns to practice. Some names that you know all too well. B.J. Ojulari returned to practice. He missed last practice. Don't know the breakdown there. Missed last practice, but he was back yesterday. And Jack Besh also made his return to practice. He was out for a week. He made his return as well. But one return that I think is going to make LSU fans not only just happy, but also just encouraged to have that presence, that talent, that size, and just the depth at that position is Nick Storrs made his return to practice. He may be digging into the back of your mind and back of your memory to remember that name. So Nick Storrs played 10 games in the 2020 season. He came to LSU first and foremost as a pitcher for the LSU baseball team, but he was riddled with surgeries and injuries and shoulder surgeries, arm surgeries, wrist surgeries. So that really left him out of LSU baseball. He just wasn't able to produce at the level that he needed to there. So he switched to football. I mean, he's got a big frame. He's a big guy, so he came to LSU football to serve in the tight end position. Again, played 10 games in 2020 season. He was out last year with injuries, with health issues. Don't know exactly what the health concerns were, but they were described as, quote, career threatening. So he was out the 2021 season, but last week he was cleared, medically cleared to come back to practice. So he made his return, and he will now be filling into the tight end position. So why is that important? Not only to have someone who has experience and someone who's, been in the program, somebody who's a veteran of the program, not even just the program, but the school. We heard so much from Brian Kelly. Let's say, for example, the number 7 and number 18 jerseys. He was going to delegate that to the team because he just didn't feel like he had a good enough grasp on the program and on the tradition to be able to grant that upon someone. So this program really is lacking a lot of experience, I guess, LSU experience. Of course, there are plenty of returners, but there are a lot of players that are coming in through the transfer portal. This entire coaching staff is brand new to LSU in the state of Louisiana, so getting Nick Storrs back has kind of that constant that's coming back, somebody who's been around the program for quite some time. But also, when you just look at it, schematically, when you look at personnel-wise, tight end is a position group that is very much so lacking. When you look at the tight end position, it's something that Brian Kelly and Mike Denbrock love to use. Notre Dame is known as tight end U for a reason. They both love using those big bodies at the tight end position, kind of utilizing them in the pass catching, utilizing them as almost like more so an extension of the wide receiver position. That is their bread and butter. And LSU only has 2 scholarship players at the tight end position in Jack Mashburn and Cole Taylor. So getting Nick Storrs back, albeit he's not an all-American tight end, but somebody with a lot of experience and just depth at that tight end position, being able to fit into what I can only expect will be a fairly tight end heavy personnel is absolutely a great addition. So good to see Nick Storrs back in the purple and gold, back on the practice field after being out for an entire year after a pretty stellar 2020 season. But switching over to the box on the baseball side of things, man, it was discouraging, and then it was encouraging, and then it was discouraging yet again. We'll break down what exactly happened in their Thursday night loss at Arkansas, what went wrong, what was good. We'll break all of that down. But before we do that, there's plenty of things to bet on, even though it's not football season. We've got the basketball playoffs. We've got the start of the Major League Baseball season. And betonline.net is your number one source for all of your betting stats and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news. All of that on betonline.net. It's your continued source for all of your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Actually, last night I put a live bet on the Minnesota Wild, the NHL team, to win by 1.5. They did not. They took it to overtime with the Dallas Stars. But you know what? That's fine. We'll take it. Thank you, Bet Online, regardless. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Bet Online, where the game starts. So, LSU baseball dropping the first game to Arkansas in a series of 3 last night at Arkansas. 5-4 was the final score. Now, I said it was discouraging, encouraging, and then discouraging again. Now, it was kind of a slow start offensively for LSU last night. They were hitless through 5 innings, and then in that 6th inning is when they just absolutely exploded. They had 4 hits in the 6th inning, got the lead in the 6th inning, and it looked incredibly encouraging. Mikhail Hilliard started on the mound last night. He had a pretty solid night. Pitching last night was not the problem for LSU. Offensively, while things weren't moving very well, Arkansas threw out their ace out there last night. He was fantastic through 5 innings, 5 2/3, I believe. And then LSU those bats came alive in the 6th inning. But what went wrong? They had 4 hits in the 6th inning, took the lead. When you look at it, just the small sample size there, you look at it and say, well, that's a team that really should have won that game. If you look at what Arkansas did, they had several errors on offense. So why did they drop that game? It's the same reason that you look at Arkansas and you say, why did they lose? How could they win that game? How could they win that game with all the errors on defense that they did late in the game? And it's because LSU did the exact same thing. I saw that series against Mississippi State last week, and I thought, okay, Jay Johnson recognized that defensively that was their biggest weakness, was on the defense. So against Mississippi State, it was much improved. Much improved. And I thought, okay, I'm seeing the light at the end of the tunnel defensively, because that was the reason why they were dropping all of these games. And then last night, they fell back into their old ways of just poor defensive efforts. I look at Jordan Thompson. There were several plays that were easy. When you are, I think Matt Moscona tweeted this out, when you're a scholarship shortstop at LSU, you have to make that play. There were several plays that I saw from Jordan Thompson last night. There was a ground ball hit right to second base, and there was a bit of a shift, so Jordan Thompson was standing right, adjacent to second base. There was a ball hit right to him. Ground ball would have been easy for him to scoop it up, get the out at first, and he completely missed it. There was a play last night where he threw the ball home, and it was just an awful throw. He was safe at home. Arkansas scores another run. So the shortstop position last night in Jordan Thompson, there were several just head scratchers. That how can you be, an experienced collegiate baseball player at LSU and you can't make those plays? It has been so incredibly frustrating to watch this LSU team dig itself out of so many holes or even get leads offensively, because the bats have not been the issue. They're one of the better offensive teams in the league. We broke down the stats on an episode last week, and in almost every offensive category, they ranked second in the SEC behind Tennessee, and there were a few categories in there they ranked third and fourth, but for the most part, they are at the top of the SEC offensively. But they're losing these games because they can't make easy plays. The infield defense, it's so incredibly frustrating, because I feel like a broken record. Because I feel like I've been saying the same things this entire season. That they can make things happen offensively. Their bats have been electric. But they just can't make simple plays. And it's not like they're facing, incredible base running. It's not like some of the bases and runs that they gave up last night were because of just great hits from Arkansas. It's because they just can't make those simple routine plays. And I'm frustrated because although I sound like a broken record, I'm sure the coaching staff does as well. And I have to wonder, what are they doing to work on these defensive mistakes? I remember, I'll go back to the very beginning of this season. In a Jay Johnson post-game presser, or Jay Johnson interview, I forgot which one it was, he said, it's okay that we're making mistakes. I'm okay with making some of these mistakes. But as long as we learn from them and improve upon them, I'm okay with it. And I heard that and I thought, I totally agree. As long as you're improving on these mistakes and you're not making the same mistakes twice, I'm cool with it, because that's how you improve throughout the season. I haven't seen continuous improvement from this defense. We saw it improve last week against Mississippi State, a sweep against Mississippi State, the reigning College World Series champions. But it's like they fix one, they take 2 steps forward and 4 steps back. And it's been incredibly frustrating to see this LSU defense. Now, they play Arkansas again tonight. It's a Thursday, Friday, Saturday series. We'll keep an eye on the LSU defense, and I'll have a full weekend report for y'all on Monday, as well as continued spring practice updates from LSU football as well. But that is going to do it for me today. I appreciate y'all for making Locked on LSU your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked on NFL Draft. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker bring the NFL Draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It is free and available wherever you get your podcasts.